"That girl is broken," the orphanage woman said cruelly. "Nobody wants her." Jack Miller looked at 8-year-old Annie with her useless arm and leg brace. Everyone else saw a damaged child. Jack saw potential. His choice would change the entire American West forever. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. "That girl is broken," Mrs. Patterson said rudely. "Nobody wants her. She's been here 4 years and not one family has taken her." Jack Miller stood in the Sunshine Orphanage looking at the children. His wife had died 2 years ago, leaving him alone to raise his 6-year-old son Tommy. Now Tommy was asking for a sister. "Which girl?" Jack asked. Mrs. Patterson pointed to a corner where a small girl sat alone. She looked about 8 years old with messy red hair and sad green eyes. Her right arm hung uselessly at her side, and her left leg was in a metal brace. "That's Annie Murphy. Born with a bad arm and leg. Can barely walk, can't use her right hand. No family wants a child who can't work or help around the house." Jack walked over to Annie. She looked up at him with smart, careful eyes. "Hello," Jack said gently. "I'm Jack Miller. What's your name?" "Annie," she whispered, surprised that someone was talking to her. "Annie, would you like to come live with me and my son Tommy?" Annie's eyes grew wide. "Really? You want me?" "Yes, I want you." Mrs. Patterson hurried over. "Mr. Miller, surely you want a healthy child. This girl will be nothing but trouble. She can't do chores, can't help with work. Why waste your time?" Jack looked at this mean woman who talked about Annie like she was garbage. "Every child deserves a home. Annie is coming with me." As they left the orphanage, Annie limped beside Jack, still not believing this was real. "Why did you pick me?" she asked quietly. "Because you looked like you needed someone to care about you," Jack said simply. Jack lived on a small ranch outside the town of Cedar Falls, Texas. His house was simple but clean, with a big yard where his son Tommy loved to play. "Tommy," Jack called as they arrived home. "Come meet your new sister." A blond boy ran out of the house, then stopped when he saw Annie's disabled arm and leg brace. "What's wrong with her?" Tommy asked bluntly. "Nothing's wrong with her," Jack said firmly. "Annie's arm and leg work differently than ours, but she's perfect just the way she is." Tommy studied Annie with curious 6-year-old eyes. "Can you play?" "I can try," Annie said shyly. "Good. I need someone to help me catch frogs by the pond." That first night, Jack tucked both children into bed. Annie had never had her own room before. She kept touching the clean sheets, not believing they were really hers. "Jack," she said softly, "I can't do much to help. My arm doesn't work right and I walk funny. Annie, you don't have to earn your place here. You belong here because I chose you. Family isn't about what you can do, it's about loving each other." Over the next few weeks, Jack discovered that Annie was incredibly smart. She couldn't do physical work, but her mind was sharp as a knife. She read every book in the house twice and she noticed things others missed. "Jack," Annie said one morning looking out the window, "your cattle are sick." Jack looked at his healthy-looking cows. "They look fine to me. Watch how they walk. See how that brown one favors her left side? And the black one keeps shaking his head? That's not normal." Jack looked closer and realized Annie was right. The cattle were showing early signs of disease that he had missed completely. "How did you see that?" he asked, amazed. "When you can't move around much, you learn to watch everything very carefully," Annie explained. Jack called the veterinarian, who confirmed that the cattle were indeed sick. Because Annie had spotted it early, Jack was able to treat them before the disease spread. This saved his entire herd and prevented him from losing thousands of dollars. "Annie, you just saved my ranch," Jack said gratefully. "Really?" Annie's face lit up with pride. "Really? Your sharp eyes are worth more than 10 strong arms." Word spread quickly through Cedar Falls about the disabled orphan girl who could spot cattle disease before anyone else. At first, people were curious. Then they were impressed. Soon, other ranchers were asking Annie to look at their animals. "I don't understand it," said Bill Harrison, whose ranch was next to Jack's. "That little girl can see things that experienced cowboys miss." Annie's reputation grew. She developed a system for spotting not just disease, but also which cattle would be the best for breeding, which horses had the most potential, and even which crops would grow best in different soil. But not everyone was happy about Annie's success. The richest man in Cedar Falls was Colonel Marcus Webb. He owned the biggest ranch in Texas and didn't like the idea of a disabled orphan girl making other ranchers more successful than him. "It's not natural," Webb complained to his foreman. "A crippled girl shouldn't be telling grown men how to run their ranches." Webb decided to prove Annie wrong. He invited several ranchers to his property for a cattle buying competition. Each person would pick the 5 best cattle from a mixed herd. Whoever picked the most valuable animals would win $500, a fortune in those days. "I'll show everyone that little girl is just lucky," Webb announced. Jack brought Annie to the competition, though he was nervous. If Annie was wrong in front of all these important men, it would humiliate her and ruin her reputation. The herd contained 50 cattle of different ages and conditions. Each competitor had 1 hour to examine the animals and make their choices. Annie couldn't move quickly because of her leg brace, so she positioned herself where she could see the entire herd. She watched each animal carefully, noting how they moved, how they breathed, how they interacted with the other cattle. Colonel Webb walked among the cattle confidently, choosing the biggest and strongest-looking animals. The other ranchers followed his lead, picking cattle that looked impressive. Annie made different choices. She picked animals that others overlooked: a small cow that moved with particular grace, a young bull that held his head in a specific way, cattle that seemed healthy but not obviously special. When the hour was up, a veterinarian and cattle expert from Dallas examined each person's choices. They looked at breeding potential, overall health, and future value. The results shocked everyone. Annie's 5 cattle were worth more than twice the value of anyone else's choices. The small cow she had picked was pregnant with twins, something no one else had noticed. The young bull had the exact bloodline that made him incredibly valuable for breeding. Colonel Webb's impressive-looking cattle turned out to have hidden problems, early signs of disease, and poor breeding potential that would make them nearly worthless within a few years. "How did you know?" Webb demanded angrily. Annie looked up at this big, intimidating man without fear. "I watched how they acted with each other. Animals tell you things with their behavior if you pay attention." "You got lucky," Webb snarled. "No," said the expert from Dallas. "This young lady has a gift I've never seen before. She understands animal behavior better than people with 50 years of experience." Word of Annie's victory spread across Texas like wildfire. Soon, people were traveling from hundreds of miles away to ask for her advice. Jack's small ranch became the most visited place in the state. But Annie's influence went far beyond just picking good cattle. She began teaching others what to look for, sharing her knowledge freely. "Don't just look at size," she would tell ranchers. "Watch how an animal moves, how it interacts with others, how it holds its head. Healthy animals behave differently than sick ones." Annie developed new methods for caring for livestock that prevented disease and improved breeding. Her techniques spread from ranch to ranch, making the entire Texas cattle industry more successful. Tommy, now 8 years old, became Annie's biggest supporter and helper. He would walk with her from place to place, carrying her notebooks and helping her demonstrate her methods. "My sister is the smartest person in Texas," Tommy would proudly tell anyone who would listen. But Annie's greatest challenge was yet to come. A terrible drought hit Texas, lasting for 2 years. Many ranchers lost their entire herds because there wasn't enough grass or water. Families who had been wealthy for generations were facing ruin. Colonel Webb lost 90% of his cattle and was nearly bankrupt. He came to Jack's ranch, humbled and desperate. "I need the girl's help," he admitted reluctantly. Annie looked at this proud man who had once mocked her. "What do you need?" "I have 50 cattle left out of 500. They're dying and I don't know how to save them." Annie studied Webb's remaining cattle carefully. They were thin and weak, but she noticed something others had missed. "Your cattle aren't dying from the drought," she announced. "They're dying from poisoned water." "What do you mean?" "There's a plant that grows near water sources during droughts. Cattle eat it when they're desperate, but it slowly poisons them. Your cattle have been drinking from a contaminated water hole." Annie showed Webb how to identify the poisonous plant and how to treat the affected cattle. More importantly, she taught him how to find clean water sources that other ranchers had overlooked. "Why are you helping me?" Webb asked. "I was cruel to you." "Because helping you helps everyone," Annie replied simply. "If your cattle get better, it proves my methods work. That helps all the ranchers learn better ways to care for their animals." Annie's drought solutions saved not just Webb's ranch but dozens of others. She developed new techniques for finding water, conserving grass, and keeping cattle healthy during difficult times. Her methods became known as the Miller system and were adopted by ranchers across the entire American West. What had started as one disabled girl's sharp observation skills became a revolution in how people cared for livestock. 5 years after Jack had adopted her, Annie was invited to speak at the National Cattlemen's Convention in Chicago. She was only 13 years old, but she was already famous across America. Standing before a crowd of 1,000 ranchers, Annie looked tiny and frail with her useless arm and leg brace. But when she spoke, her voice was strong and confident. 5 years ago, I was an orphan that nobody wanted, she began. People said I was broken and useless because my body doesn't work perfectly. The crowd listened intently. But I learned that being different doesn't mean being less. My disabilities forced me to watch and think more carefully than other people. What seemed like a weakness became my greatest strength. She paused, looking out at all the successful ranchers who had traveled from across the country to hear her speak. The American West is changing. The old ways of doing things won't work anymore. We need new ideas, new methods, new ways of thinking about our relationship with the land and animals. Annie spent the next hour sharing techniques that had revolutionized ranching. By the time she finished, she had received 3 standing ovations. After the convention, a reporter from the Chicago Tribune interviewed Annie. "What's next for you?" he asked. "I'm going to open a school," Annie replied. "A place where people can learn new ways of farming and ranching that work with nature instead of against it." "Where will you get the money for such a school?" Annie smiled. "Colonel Webb is donating the land. All the ranchers I've helped are contributing money. And Jack says I can use all the money I've earned from consulting." The Annie Miller Agricultural Institute opened 2 years later on 1,000 acres of Texas prairie. Students came from around the world to learn Annie's methods. But the school was different from other agricultural colleges. Annie made sure that disabled students were not only welcome but encouraged. "Some of the best insights come from people who see the world differently," Annie would tell her students. "Don't dismiss someone because their body or mind works differently than yours." Tommy, now 15, became Annie's business partner and closest friend. He had learned her methods so well that he could teach them to others. "Remember when I asked Dad why you look different?" Tommy said one day as they watched students practicing Annie's techniques. "I remember," Annie laughed. "I'm glad you're different. If you weren't, none of this would exist." By the time Annie turned 21, her methods had spread across the entire American West. Ranchers in California, Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana were using techniques developed by the disabled orphan girl from Texas. She had revolutionized not just cattle ranching but farming, horse breeding, and land management. The Miller system was being taught in agricultural colleges from coast to coast. Jack, now in his 50s, watched his adopted daughter with enormous pride. The decision to take the girl no one wanted had changed not just their lives, but the lives of thousands of people across America. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't adopted Annie?" Jack asked Tommy one evening. Tommy thought about it. The whole West would be different. All those ranchers who learned from Annie, all those animals that were saved, all those students who are now teaching others, none of that would exist. "One person really can change the world," Jack agreed. On Annie's 25th birthday, the town of Cedar Falls held a celebration in her honor. The entire population turned out, along with visitors from across Texas. Colonel Webb, now one of Annie's closest friends and biggest supporters, made a speech. 20 years ago, I thought this young woman was worthless because she looked different," he admitted to the crowd. "I was wrong about everything. Annie Miller didn't just change ranching, she changed how we think about people, about potential, about what it means to be valuable." Annie stood to address the crowd, still using her leg brace but no longer self-conscious about it. "When Jack Miller adopted me, he didn't just give me a home," she said. "He gave me the chance to prove that every person has something important to contribute to the world." She looked at Jack, who was beaming with pride. "Some people are born with strong bodies, some with sharp minds, some with artistic talents. I was born with disabilities that forced me to develop different abilities. But every person here has something unique and valuable to offer." The crowd erupted in applause. The American West was built by people who were brave enough to try new things, to go new places, to believe in possibilities that others couldn't see. Today it's still being built by people who refuse to accept that things have to stay the same. As the celebration continued into the night, Annie sat quietly with Jack and Tommy, watching the people whose lives had been touched by her work. "Do you ever regret adopting the broken girl from the orphanage?" Annie asked Jack with a smile. Jack put his arm around his adopted daughter. "Annie, you were never broken. You were just different. And that difference didn't make you less valuable, it made you priceless." The story of Jack Miller and Annie Murphy became legend throughout the American West. It proved that families are built on love, not blood, that strength comes in many forms, and that the greatest contributions to society often come from the people that others overlook or underestimate. And in Cedar Falls, Texas, a bronze statue still stands in the town square, showing a man, a boy, and a girl with a leg brace looking toward the horizon together, reminding everyone who passes by that the most extraordinary achievements often begin with the simple decision to give someone a chance.